You're listening to Pri-Zen, Life Lessons from Lockup. I'm Courtney Stewart. I'm a journalist, and I've been covering criminal justice issues in Virginia for 20 years.
I'm Jesse Crossan. I've been incarcerated since 2002, and we're here to share stories and experiences and perspective from one of the more than 2 million people incarcerated nationwide.
Hello, this is a prepaid debit call from...
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you today?
Doing well. Got yourself?
I'm doing great. I'm excited about today's topic, and which is education and opportunity. So you have accomplished a lot during your 18 years incarcerated in that area, as far as taking advantage of things that have been available to you formally through Department of Corrections, but also finding ways to gain knowledge and expertise in various areas through less traditional means. So I wanted to hear a little bit about just generally what those areas are, what you've done since you've been incarcerated, and how you managed to do it.
Okay. Yesterday I was sitting down with a guy, and we were talking about the fact that we both kind of just tried to take advantage of every opportunity that's come up. You really seem to have those two different groups in prison. You have guys that sit around and they've been locked up for 30 years and don't have a GED and have never held down a job and never, gotten a trade. And then you have people who've just kind of taken advantage of every single opportunity that's there. So for me, what that started off with was college, which is just, I was incredibly blessed to have a family that really pushed me and was able to provide for that. Because, college is not paid for by the prison system. Supposedly Pell Grants are now available, and there seems to be a push on the national level to make sure that education is a priority in prison again. Because one of the most important things is job readiness and job preparedness. Because someone who can get out and immediately get a job is much less likely to come back to prison, assuming other factors, at least on a kind of pragmatic basis. People aren't going to be wondering, how to pay their rent or how they're going to get food or how they're going to make it by. So being able to be job ready and especially go into a position where they can respect themselves is huge. So being able to get a college degree, I got a bachelor's that I completed after about 15 years. It just took me so long because it was all by correspondence and it was all through the mail and it all had to be proctored, and it was this kind of long, complicated process, but it was something that I was able to do that most people aren't. And again, I'm hoping that the Pell Grant coming back, or supposedly coming back, makes a difference for people. On top of that, I took a vocational trade. I took an electrical apprenticeship and then got my journeyman's license. So I'm a licensed electrician in the state of Virginia, and this summer I'll be able to test for my master's license, where I can open my own company, pull my own permits, basically do anything I wanted as far as electrical work. One of the biggest things too is the informal is meditation. So I moved into the cell with a guy who got me back into meditation and martial arts after years and years. I'd grown up with a father who meditated and did yoga daily. And I'd done karate as a kid, and I loved it. It was a big part of who I was, and I had lost that as I started drinking and getting high and doing these other things. I really lost that part of myself, and I was able to find it again. And then after that guy went home, I was able to find a Zen teacher, and that I've talked about before, James Yates, who I've had a weekly conversation with every year for every week for 11 years or something. And that became a huge part of my life because I've meditated daily for all those years, and it's become one of the major kind of transformations. I also just learned life skills. Living in difficult circumstances as far as, being in close with people, having to learn to compromise, having to learn to set firm boundaries, having to learn to both stand up for yourself and at times understand where, we have to be understanding of other people has really helped. And that's not necessarily a formal process, but I've reached out to all resources to make that a formal process. I've talked to James about it extensively. I've talked to a sponsor about it. I've talked to the psychologist here about it. I've talked to pretty much everybody I can about, basically how to grow and how to be a better person, and be a different person and have a different perspective. Some of those things are more kind of formal as far as emotional regulation skills. I both took and then was involved in teaching, DBT classes at Buckingham as part of the mental health program. I was both receiving or taking yoga classes and then eventually teaching my own class until they had to shut it down because I'm not a certified yoga teacher, so I wasn't allowed by policy to be teaching a yoga class. There were just all sorts of service and mentoring and work opportunities. Basically, every time there's been an opportunity, it's almost like that movie Yes Man. I've just tried to say yes to it, whatever it is, because I've realized that the alternative is to kind of sit around and waste my time and then not really have anything to show for it, or to show up every day and gain everything that I possibly can and then share that every opportunity. So that means that if it turns around. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, you said DBT. Can you just describe what that is and what that means?
Okay, so dialectical behavioral therapy is cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the big modalities that's used in the Department Department of Corrections, and it's taught at every school for counselors and for psychologists. And it's kind of a purely way of reprocessing and rethinking things. But one of the problems is that when we're traumatized or when we're in certain situations, we can't access that calm, rational part of our brain. So DBT, which was developed by a woman who suffered from borderline personality disorder and basically designed it to treat herself, is something that treats the whole of a person. It treats the part of a person that's been traumatized. There's a mindfulness aspect. There's an emotional regulation aspect. There's an interpersonal effectiveness aspect. It's a much more kind of comprehensive program that isn't based on just a cerebral approach, but rather a kind of holistic approach of self. And it's one of the better programs that I found that can be codified. Like, I really love Gestalt psychology, or Gestalt therapy, but you can't put that in a class. It is a much more comprehensive, holistic thing that you need to work with kind of a trained professional. Whereas DBT can be taught in class format, and the skills can be taught and then applied by anybody who's interested.
That is really interesting, and also, I mean, I guess that seems like a positive thing that was being offered not only as a treatment modality, but as something that you could be trained in, so that you could then share that with other or work with other inmates as a mentor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the biggest things is, we learn something, and I remember my first wrestling coach said this. He said that, I didn't really become a good wrestler until I had to coach. And so it was all the years of just learning how to do something. I learned to a certain degree, but when I had to share and teach other people, I learned in a much different way, in a much kind of deeper way. So that one of the things is, when we went through the class for DBT, and then we were allowed to be basically like program aides or class aides for those classes, we were able to use our own experience. And while we were helping other people, we were also helping ourselves. And that then gave us a deeper level and understanding for the next time we had that opportunity. So it was kind of a compounding opportunity to continue to grow in understanding and then be able to share that with others. So one of the essential aspects, it is noise present, but sometimes it is learning and having those opportunities and taking advantage of them, but then also sharing them with other people after we do so.
So that was something that you got formally through DOC. The yoga training was something, I guess that was a program that was available when you were at Buckingham, but it was not organized by DOC, but it was another group that came in. Is that right?
Yes. So at Buckingham, I was involved in what's called the SAM program, which was a treatment for those suffering from mental health issues, medical issues, or who were subject to predation, just due to the nature of the system or the nature of who they were. And it was really radical. I mean, we brought in all these things. We started a garden. I had never heard of a personal garden existing in the Department of Corrections, but we had one for the program. So we were using gardening as therapy. We contacted a local yoga group or yoga community, and they were coming in and teaching classes originally just for the SAM program, and then eventually for the general population as well. I mean, we had people who were being trained in EMDR, which is radical for the Department of Corrections. It was one of the most effective treatments for trauma, but it's not something you see widely available or necessarily mainstream.
And can you describe that again? Can you just describe I don't think a lot of people will know what that is.
Sure. So EMDR is eye movement, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So it's essentially trying to, the problem when we access past trauma is we don't perceive it in a way that is kind of present and comfortable. It tends to trigger us, and there tends to be this emotional, incredibly high response. Our heart starts to beat, the chemicals flood through our body, and then we eventually just shut down. And so we go from experiencing something that is essentially creating or recreating a terror that we experienced to going to being completely shut down and either depersonalizing or not being present with it. So EMDR is a process that's either done through literally eye movements where while someone is experiencing a memory or a thought or the things that have come up as a result of that, they just follow your finger that's in front of their face and they move back and forth, what's called bilateral stimulation from left to right, or it can be done with tapping, which is on different sides of the body. And it sounds crazy. It doesn't sound like the kind of thing that would be incredibly effective, but it really is. I encourage everybody who's interested to look into this. It's been done with veterans. It's been done with trauma survivors. It's been done with people all over the world, and it really helps the brain reprocess. There may be a connection between this and REM sleep. So REM sleep is where we kind of process events and put them in long-term memory in our lives. And the idea that trauma interrupts that process, and again, this isn't sure, this is just based on my very limited knowledge and known interest, but REM sleep allows us to process those memories. But trauma never gets processed into those memories to where it is just a kind of something in the past. It's something that we continue to experience in the present. When something triggers us, when we experience something that brings trauma back up, we tend to return to the period, and we don't recognize that the person that we see in front of us is not the person that hurt us years ago. our body is perceiving as if it was. So EMDR is designed to allow us to recognize what is in the past and what is in the present, and allow us to reprocess those memories into something just like other memories that we have in our lives, rather than something that constantly retriggers us.
So, so there are formal I guess programs offered by DOC, and then at Buckingham at least, and prior to the pandemic, there were these community groups or other opportunities that became available. But then there's learning that just happens from the people that you encounter, fellow people who are incarcerated with you, and you've learned a bunch of things because it's going in as an 18-year-old. You didn't. I mean, there's a lot of things you haven't learned at 18, a lot of basic things, and I would love to hear some of those stories and what that process was like and how you managed to make that happen.
Absolutely. I think I've mentioned this before, but I learned how to shave from a serial killer. I had a roommate, and I didn't find out until later, until we'd been in the cell for a while, that he was at least accused as a serial killer, but basically been charged. But I didn't know how to shave. I couldn't shave when I got locked up. I was too young. So I was going, and he was like, no, you want to go with the grain, or if you want to really find, you need to go against. And he was explaining these things to me that I never had the opportunity to learn out there in the world. Um, One of the other things that really struck me, it was the first time I really tutored and mentored somebody. And it's strange because I was tutoring somebody who was older than me, but there was this guy, his name was Patrick, people called him Big Baby, and I just really loved this guy. He was just a truly kind-hearted, wonderful individual who'd grown up in just horrible circumstances and had not had a lot of opportunity. And all he wanted more than anything was to get his GED and go home and get a good job and do well. And I mean, he had a lot of skills. He was an incredible boxer. He actually went home and had a professional boxing career before he got sidetracked by other things in life. He was undefeated. He knew how to barber. He knew how to cut hair. He knew how to do a fair number of things. He had never had the opportunity for an education, and he was so kind of stuck under the pressure of it that he had been struggling with his GED. So we made a deal. He was going to teach me how to box, and I was going to teach him how to basically pass his GED. So we would sit down, and every night we would work out together and we would box. And then throughout the day, we would spend a few hours going over his math stuff, going over his language stuff, basically studying for his GED. And then we spent months, and I don't remember if it was 3 months or 6 months, but I remember the day that he came back with his test results and picked me up because he was 6'6", 270 pounds. He just picked me up in the air and swung me around like a little kid with this huge grin and smile on his face, and was just so grateful. And I remember the day of his graduation where he was sweating through his shirt. He was so excited because his family was coming, and he was a valedictorian, and he got to give the speech. And that was one of the best days of my life. And it made me realize how important it was to show up for other people and to share with other people. So I've always been really good at finding teachers in my own life and finding opportunities. And that was the one that really cemented for me, and this was early on, just how important it is to show up in other people's lives in the same way. Because again, it was like watching my kid graduate from high school. And again, he's older than me, so I know that's not realistic. But it was so meaningful and it was so emotional. It shaped my future kind of drive to continue to tutor, to eventually be a mentor in the same community, to continue to teach, to continue to do that, because it's incredibly gratifying, it's incredibly meaningful, and it allows this cycle to continue. I learn from other people, I share with other people, and then they share with others. We get to, like, step by step, as corny as it sounds, make the world a little bit better place day by day.
Well, I think that's true. Certainly that is true broadly. I mean, it's true in prison. It's also true out in the world. I guess. I think I've told you this, and lots of other people know this, but I've actually never taken a formal journalism course in my life, and my process of learning how to be a reporter has come entirely from learning not just from my editors or news directors, but from people who technically, were less experienced than I am, or who I was supervising, but they have skills, or they knew things, or had learned things that I didn't know. And I've always thought that anyone around you can be a teacher, and you just have to try to be open to those lessons, and yeah, be ready to see opportunities to learn where you might not expect them.
Well, and the same thing is you talk about, finding teachers everywhere. You then have continued to contribute. I remember when I first came here during the pandemic, and I was just struggling. It was such a huge adaptation after almost 18 years in a cell to be in an open room with 80 people, the noise and the smells, and it was just crazy. And you essentially sent me like the story of an editor, and you told me how to break things in life down into stories and a way of looking at them. And it was one of those calming, helpful things. and I had sent you some of my writings and stories, and you edited them for me and gave me advice. And so you've continued to do the same thing, and you recognize the value in not only learning from people but also giving back. And I mean, I think that's what makes people and relationships stronger. We find people that are helpful and that allow us to be helpful to other people, and again, we build these kind of positive rather than negative relationships. I think that's really what growth is all about. So in the Department of Corrections, for example, Big Baby was the first one to teach me how to box. At Buckingham, we had heavy bags, punching bags on the yards. And there were these kind of like communities that developed of guys who would go and, kind of start boxing clubs. Not necessarily boxing for real, but, training on the bag, doing drills together, working out together. And I remember we had this little crew of guys who was this group of misfits, people from all different walks of life, all different races, all different histories. We had one transgender individual. It was like the most broad, varied thing. And it was a true community. I remember somebody was trying to pick on one of the guys one time. And another guy basically went up and said, look, if you want to pick on him, pick on me. And it was, you're not going to continue to take advantage of somebody because we're in this together. Like, we're here to help each other. And our group was so strange because you had one guy who had a history of predation, a history of being picked on. You had another guy who had a history of violence in the system. And you saw the change in behavior from one. One guy stopped being the guy who was getting picked on, and the other guy stopped being the violent guy. Like, this program ended up being helpful, and it was totally unofficial. It was totally informal. It was just a group of guys coming together and supporting one each other and finding common ground. And those are the communities and the places that really, really make such a difference. And I think that's why I'm such a big fan of 12-step groups, of informal groups, of things that are not necessarily within the traditional scope of programs or structures of the Department of Corrections, because I think that they can be the most transformative. Because we're all looking for community, and we can find it, wherever we are if we look hard enough.
What do you think as far as opportunities? I mean, you said before making sure that there are educational opportunities. I mean, right now, um, a lot of the programming got shut down, or all of it really, during the pandemic. But as things come back online, what do you think would be the most critical pieces for Department of Corrections to try to put into place to have the broadest impact?
Well, I think trauma and addiction are the number one issues as far as people coming to prison in the first place. And I think that things that are put into place, whether that's making sure that all psychologists, or at least one psychologist or psych associate in every prison, is trained in trauma-informed care, or trained in EMDR, or trained in interfamily systems, IFS, or like something along the lines of specifically dealing with trauma, somebody along the lines of specifically dealing with addiction. Because I think a lot of times addiction classes are offered and they're very limited, or they're very in-depth addiction programs, but they're only at certain places, and you can only be eligible after certain years or certain. It's kind of disjointed. Like, reform and growth is not the focus of the Department of Corrections. Housing is, and that's the problem. Because they're worried about keeping people in here, and then if they have time and the opportunity, they'll get them programming, or they'll wait until reentry to get their programming. And I think that's unfortunate. I think from day one, programming should be the first thing. I think second to that is job opportunities and work. And I think that means also things like, taking advantage of the Pell grants and making sure people can go to college, making sure that their vocational trainings that make them job ready when they go home. And a lot of the vocational classes have turned into this kind of imitation of a real class, because they don't have tools. So you go to learn a skill, and you don't have the actual tools of the material you're learning out of a book. And while that may look good to have a piece of paper that says you know how to do something, if you've never held a pair of linemen in your hand, if you've never actually worked with something, you don't know what you're doing. And I think that's unfortunate, because the day you show up on a job site with a piece of paper saying you know how to do something, you don't even know how to hold the pliers or how to hold the snips. Well, that's not going to look very good as far as being job ready. So I think there needs to be an emphasis on education and vocational training. And then I think work. Work is huge. I wrote a whole essay on this that got published in the Marshall Project. It was about how work can be exploitive of prisoners, and it can be negative. But for me, it was huge and transformative. It allowed me to reconnect with my father and all the things that he was good at, because he was, both had a master's degree, but also was this very blue collar, wizardly kind of, fix anything with duct tape and black plastic. Like, he was this really, really capable guy, and I didn't get to learn all those things from him, both because of what was going on in his life and because of what was going on in mine. So work connected me with that.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Work also taught me what I valued. It taught me, what I enjoyed. It helped me come to the point that I know that I want to work with other people, that I want to be a counselor, I want to be a psychologist, I want to work in a position where I can help other people, because that has been the thing that's been most meaningful to me in my life. So I think that emphasizing work, emphasizing treatment and training, accountability, mindfulness-based stress reduction, job readiness, all of these things, which is a very complex process. It's by no means easy. But I think that the more kind of broadly we look at this, and the more we emphasize giving opportunities and stressing the need for opportunities, the better off we are.
Thank you for using GTL.